The night air in Washington, D.C. usually carried a certain hum. It was the quiet energy of power. It was the sound of diplomacy at work. On Wednesday, May 21, 2025, this feeling was palpable. The Capitol Jewish Museum buzzed with activity. It hosted the Young Diplomats Reception. This event was meant to be an evening of connection. Young, bright minds gathered there. They were discussing important ideas, fostering mutual understanding. They held hopes for a better future, a future built on dialogue. Little did anyone within those walls suspect. A dark shadow approached this beacon of international hope. It was ready to unleash unimaginable sorrow. The festive mood inside the museum was vibrant. Laughter and conversation filled the halls. Then suddenly, the night shattered. The sharp crack of gunfire pierced the calm. It was a sound utterly alien to this place of peace. Confusion erupted instantly. Screams echoed where moments before there had been polite discourse. People scrambled for cover, their faces etched with terror. An evening dedicated to peaceful engagement met a brutal, violent end. The promise of fruitful discussion turned into a nightmare. The sanctity of the gathering was violated in the most horrific way. The air filled with fear and disbelief. The attack unfolded with terrifying speed. It happened just outside the museum's entrance. Yaron Lischinsky and Sarah Milgrim were leaving the reception. They stepped out into the night, perhaps discussing the event. Then, the assailant struck. The violence was targeted. It was brutal. The sounds of the city, the traffic, the distant sirens were drowned out by the immediate horror. Chaos erupted on the normally staid streets of the capital. This was a stark, bloody reminder. Danger can lurk even in places considered sanctuaries of thought and diplomacy. The bullets that flew that night tore through more than just flesh. They tore through hope. Security personnel reacted with swiftness and bravery. They ran towards the danger, not away from it. Their training kicked in amidst the unfolding pandemonium. The alleged shooter, Elias Rodriguez, was quickly apprehended. He had briefly entered the museum after the attack. His capture prevented further bloodshed, but the damage was done. Initial reports began to trickle out to a stunned city, then to a disbelieving world. The diplomatic community felt a cold dread. The tragic news was soon confirmed. 2 young lives dedicated to service had been extinguished. A night that began with so much promise ended in profound, senseless tragedy. Yaron Lischinsky was an Israeli national. He served his country with quiet dedication. At the Israeli embassy, he was a research assistant. His focus was sharp Middle East and North African affairs. This was a complex and often volatile region. Colleagues spoke of his unwavering passion for his work. They remembered his keen intellect and his tireless work ethic. He delved deep into research, seeking understanding. His commitment to Israel, to its security and its place in the world was profound. He believed in the power of knowledge to inform policy. His loss was a blow to those who valued his sharp insights. Sarah Milgrim was an American citizen. She hailed from Kansas City, Missouri. She brought a heartland spirit to her diplomatic work. She served in the Israeli embassy's public diplomacy division. This role was crucial. It involved building bridges of understanding. Sarah was deeply committed to peace-building initiatives. She had a particular passion for sustainability projects. She believed that nations could find common ground. She felt that dialogue could overcome even the deepest divides. Friends fondly recalled her vibrant, infectious spirit. They remembered her deep well of kindness. She was a beacon of positivity in a challenging field. The tragedy was made even more poignant by their personal connection. Reports quickly surfaced that Yaron and Sarah were a couple. Whispers circulated, filled with sadness. They were rumored to be planning their engagement. Their shared dreams were not just professional. They were building a future together. A future filled with love, with shared purpose, and with continued service. This deeply personal dimension of the tragedy amplified the loss. Their bond, a symbol of hope and connection, was cruelly severed. The bullets stole not just 2 diplomats but a shared lifetime of possibilities. Their love story ended before it could truly blossom. Their roles as young diplomats make their loss particularly acute. They represented the future of international relations. Their youth was matched by their idealism. They were dedicated to fostering understanding between nations. They worked tirelessly to build connections in a fractured world. The cruel irony is that their lives devoted to peace were ended by an act of extreme violence. They embodied the best of diplomatic service, intelligence, dedication, and a fundamental belief in humanity. Their bright futures were extinguished in a moment of hate. Their potential, so vast and promising, was tragically unfulfilled. This was a loss for their families, their nations, and for the world. The man behind the shots was Elias Rodriguez. He was 30 years old, from Chicago. This was a major American city, far from the front lines of global conflict. On the surface, Rodriguez presented an ordinary profile. He had no prior criminal record. This lack of a police history made the sudden violence even more shocking to investigators. He appeared to be just another individual navigating life. Yet beneath this unremarkable exterior, a dangerous and consuming ideology had clearly taken root. His journey from Chicago to Washington, D.C. was not a spontaneous act. It was a journey with deadly intent. The premeditated nature of the attack became chillingly clear. Rodriguez did not simply happen upon the scene. He flew from Chicago to the nation's capital. He transported a handgun with him. It was concealed within his checked luggage. This act alone demonstrated careful planning and a determination to evade initial security. Furthermore, he purchased a ticket for the young diplomat's reception. He did so just 3 hours before the event commenced. This indicated a clear, specific target. His movements were not random. They were deliberate, calculated steps on a path leading directly to tragedy and murder. During his arrest, Rodriguez left no doubt about his motivations. Witnesses heard him shout, "Free Palestine!" This was a clear, politically charged statement. It immediately linked the attack to the long-standing Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Later, in police custody, he elaborated, "I did it for Palestine, I did it for Gaza," he reportedly told investigators. His words were a direct claim of responsibility. They pointed unequivocally to the ongoing conflict as his driving force. His declaration echoed the slogans of a bitter, protracted, and deeply emotional struggle. The violence in D.C. was a horrifying extension of a distant war. His ideological leanings were further illuminated by his online activity. A review of his social media accounts showed strong, vocal support for the Palestinian cause. He frequently posted criticisms of Israeli government policy. Significantly, Rodriguez expressed admiration for an Air Force member. This individual had tragically set himself on fire. He did so outside the Israeli embassy in Washington in February 2024. This admiration for an act of extreme protest suggested a process of radicalization. The attack underscored the terrifying reach of online extremism. It showed how it can fuel real-world violence. The backdrop was the heightened international tension. This included Israel's major offensive in the Gaza Strip, ongoing since July 2023. The condemnation from United States leadership was swift and unequivocal. President Donald Trump addressed the nation. He spoke with force about the heinous act. He labeled the shooting a cowardly act of anti-Semitism. He vowed that such an attack must not and would not go unpunished. Jeanine Pirro, the interim U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, echoed this strong sentiment. She stated firmly that anti-Semitism has no place in American society. It would not be tolerated in the nation's capital or anywhere else within its borders. The message was clear: justice would be pursued vigorously. Israel responded with profound grief and immediate action. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu publicly expressed his deep sorrow. He conveyed the immense pain felt by the entire nation. He immediately issued an order. Security was to be heightened at all Israeli diplomatic missions around the globe. This was a necessary precaution in the face of such a targeted attack. Across the world, at Israeli embassies and consulates, flags were lowered to half-staff. It was a somber symbol of national mourning. A nation grieved its fallen diplomats, who were symbols of its presence on the world stage. Ted Deutch, CEO of the American Jewish Committee, remembered the victims. He described Yaron and Sarah as warm, vibrant, and dedicated to promoting peace. The public response was an outpouring of grief and solidarity. Vigils were quickly organized in Washington, D.C. and beyond. Spontaneous memorials sprang up at the site of the shooting. Flowers, candles, and heartfelt notes accumulated outside the Capitol Jewish Museum. People from all walks of life gathered. They came to mourn the senseless loss of two young, promising lives. They sought solace in shared sorrow and quiet reflection. The community stood together against the hatred that fueled the violence. Messages of condolence and support flooded in from leaders and citizens across the globe. The tragedy resonated far beyond the city limits. The terrible night of May 21st left lingering, painful reflections. The attack served as a stark reminder. Those who dedicate their lives to diplomatic service often face profound vulnerability. They work on the front lines of international relations, sometimes in perilous environments. This incident raised urgent questions about the security measures in place for diplomatic personnel, even in supposedly safe capitals. The violence threatened to cast a long, dark pall over international relations. It underscored the critical and ongoing need to combat extremism and hatred in all its insidious forms. Diplomacy, though tragically challenged by this event, remains the only viable path forward. The memory of Yaron Lischinsky and Sarah Milgrim must serve as an enduring call for peace and understanding.